I think it was 3 weeks ago or thereabouts when we were here in this chamber and COVID was spreading across Victoria from a leak from hotel quarantine in South Australia. And I warned at that point in some of my remarks that the Liberals who were over there trolling the Victorian government, somehow saying that a leak from South Australia was the fault of Victoria, that maybe they shouldn't be so smug because it could happen anywhere in any Australian city at any time. Sydney, for instance, it wasn't a prophecy or a prediction, it was just common sense, because the Prime Minister has left the country, every state, every territory, every city, every region, exposed and vulnerable because of his failures in vaccine and quarantine. As has been said, he had 2 jobs this year, 2 jobs, and he's failed them. Now, we've heard some of the government speakers tell us, well, it's all going okay, it's 99.9% effective. As a member for Cowan said, this nonsense when we say medi-hotels, as if somehow that will solve it. They're hotels. They're not built to contain viruses. And the fact is that Australia will continue to suffer more leaks from hotel quarantine, more outbreaks and more lockdowns and restrictions, as we're seeing in Sydney now. Now, the government's in denial. I'd just like to read a quote, actually. I'm sorry she's not here. We saw the member for Higgins, my good friend. And I saw her on TV a couple of weeks ago. She was talking about hotel quarantine on Patricia Karvelis's ABC show in the afternoon briefing, and she said, I quote, "Well, the first thing I want to say is that hotel quarantining is working. What is not working is when the cases leave quarantining. So we're not seeing mass outbreaks in quarantine hotels that we can't contain. What we're finding is that people are leaving hotel quarantine, going out into the community, and the community is resulting in a community outbreak." And she tells us that she's one of the smarter ones over there, you know. I mean, here was I thinking the whole purpose of quarantine was to stop the infectious disease from getting out into the community, but silly old me, what would we know? Purpose-built quarantine is the only type of quarantine that's 100% effective, and that is what the government, the Prime Minister, has refused month after month after month to build, relying on this failing system that will infect Australians. Then there's the vaccine. Talk about failure. About 3% of our population vaccinated, 50 to 70% in much of the developed world now. We're way behind. We've got no choice. They bet their house. They put all their eggs in the AstraZeneca basket, which is turning out to be a mess. We've got no supply. Most of the states and territories have run out. Can't get a Pfizer booking for months. We've got no targets, we learnt today, just a horizon. Funny thing about a horizon, as the Labor leader said, is you never actually meet a horizon. You can meet a target, but you can't meet a horizon. We've got no ads. They've outsourced public education now to Clive Palmer, who's dumped 2 of his nonsense misinformation leaflets around my electorate this week alone. And we're in a race against COVID, so the Prime Minister says to save lives and livelihoods, but that's not a talking point. It's not a talking point. It's not stuff you say in question time to get out of the question. It's actually something you have to do by fixing the vaccine rollout and fixing quarantine. I feel really sorry for the military guy, the guy they've now got fronting the failed vaccine rollout, Lieutenant General, can't remember his name right now. It's no surprise. I mean, the Prime Minister, remember the border security thing? He was up there on TV every day stopping the boats. He had the military there, the flags. But he won't actually take responsibility for borders or quarantine now when it really, really matters to every Australian. He is taking responsibility for one aspect of the borders, of course. He's locking every Australian in Australia indefinitely, indefinite detention for the whole country because he cannot get the vaccine right and cannot get purpose-built quarantine. But it is the defining characteristic, above all else, of this Prime Minister, an arrogant, smug refusal to ever take responsibility. We saw it nicking off to Hawaii during the bushfires. I don't hold a hose, mate. We've seen it with climate change, nicking off to the G7, going on a UK pub crawl funded by the taxpayer, then a little secret side trip for a bit of family history, probably while his QAnon mate was house-sitting Kirribilli for him. It's not an Airbnb, Prime Minister, and we've seen it on the quarantine and the vaccines. But he does try and take credit for everyone else's good work. We hear all the time, well, Australia's done well compared to other countries. Yeah, we have, because the community's made sacrifices, because we've had good health professionals and a good health system, and politicians have been smart enough on this, unlike climate change, to listen to the experts, and because the premiers have done well. He has failed at his 2 jobs. Every Australian should understand that every future lockdown, every future restriction, every future leak, every future illness is because of this Prime Minister's failure to do his two jobs, vaccines and quarantine.